Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 324. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about canoeing, trendy restaurants, and skyscrapers as we go to the Twin Cities in Minnesota, starting today with Minneapolis.
One more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into the first of a two-part interview on the Twin Cities of Minnesota, I do have three news stories for you. The first, some bad news. TSA agents apparently in some airports are not getting background checks, which, as I recall, was part of the argument why we needed to nationalize airport security in the United States. And also bad news for the United Continental merger. The new combined company posted a Q1 loss of $448 million. About $162 million of that are costs that they would not have had to incur if they hadn't done the merger in the first place. But then to leave you on a more positive note, two Colorado state troopers are being credited with being heroes for helping save the life of a man who had a heart attack on a flight to Atlanta. They heard a commotion behind them and jumped in to help the crew. We worked as a team. It didn't strike me until afterwards what had happened, until the other passengers started asking if we were paramedics. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Kirk Horsted, who's coming to us from MakeYourBreakaway.com. Come to talk to us about the Twin Cities, that is, the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul in Minnesota. Kirk, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Chris.
And you have lived in the Twin Cities for quite some time. You know, I say the Twin Cities, and I'm sure there are many places that consider themselves the Twin Cities, but these, for me, are the Twin Cities, up there in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I have some connections to there. My brother was born in St. Paul while my father was getting his master's degree at the University of Minnesota there. So,
Wonderful.
why should someone go up to the Twin Cities?
Well, Well, since you mentioned there are some imposters out there, I just would like to make it clear that we are the Twin Cities, and I'm glad you have a connection to here. Everybody should. When you have a last name like Christensen, you may have some Scandinavian blood in you, and we have a lot of pride and still a lot of liveliness about that lineage. But there are lots of reasons to come here, and the seasons are one reason. It's different all the time, and each season is beautiful. My favorite is summer. I'll be very blunt about that. But even in the winter, we have things going on. We have very vibrant arts community here. We have lots of sports and entertainment, and of course, we're probably known most for our lakes. There are 10,000 lakes in Minnesota. There are actually more, but we've just stuck with that number. And they're all over the metro as well, and water everywhere. And I can guarantee you, if you come here, you'll find lots to do and lots of beauty both.
Excellent. So you would recommend a summer trip, and I certainly understand winter can be a little more of an adventure in that area.
I would recommend summer first, but there are things to do, and there is beauty in every season. Lots of people's favorite season here is fall, because the fall colors are so beautiful, at least for a while, and yet the weather is still very nice, and there's a lot of traditions. So any time is good. Summer is my personal favorite, however.
And if we come to the Twin Cities, and let's assume we're coming in the summertime, what itinerary would you recommend?
Well, I was thinking about that, and 4 days to me is probably the minimum you would want just to take a quick look at all we have to offer. And I would say stay longer if you can, and stay here and then get outstate to one of our lakes or resorts or somewhere in nature would be ideal. But I divided this into 4 days, and the first 2 days I'm giving to Minneapolis and the area. Minneapolis is twice as big as St. Paul, so I guess that they get 2 days. We're very into democracy and being fair here, so I'm just trying to stay with that. The third day I would give to St. Paul and that area, and then the fourth day I'm calling Get Out of Town, because even if you stay as close as 20 or 30 minutes, there are completely different worlds, lots of them. Or even if you could drive a few hours, I have a handful of ideas what you should see that is near but not in the Twin Cities. So 4 days to me, and that's how I've divided it.
Starting in Minneapolis, and what would you recommend we see in Minneapolis?
Well, if I'm thinking about this about day one, maybe you're staying downtown or close. So I would give the first day or part of the day to just exploring downtown. And there's a lot going on there. We've got skyscrapers that go 50-some stories and lots of little districts. And in the downtown area, I would certainly start in the warehouse district, which is kind of, in the past couple of decades, we've turned what was sort of a scuzzy and worn-down, literally warehouse area into a very hip zone full of shops and bars and restaurants and, of course, some offices and things. Probably one of the more famous things there is First Avenue Nightclub, which is well worth a stop if you can get to a concert, and that is where Prince started performing and kind of put his name on that place. And we're still very into Prince, and he still spends part of the time here and shows up announced and unannounced. So the warehouse district is very cool. That's also where the new Target Field is, where our Minnesota Twins play, and certainly one of the better ballparks in America, and well worth sneaking in and having a beer and a brat if possible. Near there is the theater district, and actually we have theaters in the warehouse, but there is a whole street called Hennepin Avenue, and many, many theaters on there that the city has restored one by one, and they are all so gorgeous inside. You can see theaters anywhere, so I'm not sure you need to spend a whole night in there, but that certainly would be one thing to do. And
when you say theaters, movie theaters or live drama or?
They are live theaters. They will have music, and they will have Broadway shows, and sometimes the local event or fundraiser. My favorite is the State Theater, which has sort of a Beaux-Arts interior that they found as they dug out all the interiors, and a beautiful balcony. And that was built in 1921, I think, and restored fairly recently. And you can go see Wilco one night and Mamma Mia the next, and perhaps, as I say, a fashion show or fundraiser the next. But the city has done a good job of restoring that street and all those theaters. And just one block off of that a lot of people would mix with the theaters is Nicollet Mall, which has become Restaurant Row. Not the only one, but lots of great restaurants in various ethnic and price points both. And the Nicollet Mall also has a very famous sculpture of Mary Tyler Moore, another one of our, local heroes. I don't think she ever lived here, but that was where her TV show took place. And there is a sculpture, a statue rather, of her at that moment that she's throwing her hat into the air saying, "You're going to make it after all." And it's kind of symbolic that we're understated people. We know we're a flyover town to many coastal types, and she is telling us that, yes, we are here and we are going to make it, and we all do in our own way. That would probably kill most of your morning, or you could make a whole day of it, but lots of people would send you toward uptown now. You can continue walking. It's not that far. You can take a bus. We have certainly rental bikes of all kinds, including one that's sort of a public situation where you can pick it up one place, buy a card, and then drop it another place that is really catching on and very popular. And you'd probably want to go just a little bit outside of downtown. You can continue up Hennepin Avenue, and you'll find yourself at the Sculpture Garden, which is part of the Walker Art Center, which is well worth going in if you have time as well, a modern art center in a stunning building. But the Sculpture Garden is free and pretty much open all the time. It has gorgeous modern art sculptures and beautiful grounds and trees and shrubs, and you can chill out, you can bring a blanket and have a picnic. A very famous sculpture is called Spoon, Bridge, and Cherry, and as you're staring at that one, which has a fountain and lots of land surrounding it, you're also looking at a gorgeous view of downtown. Incidentally, there's a famous bridge that connects the Sculpture Garden to Loring Park, which has a little lake and lots of restaurants and bars and things surrounding it, and that is well worth a stop. And you take this famous bridge that was built at the same time as the Sculpture Garden over to that, and you might want to stop at Lurkat, which is a beautiful restaurant that has views and is done in sort of international old world style, but you can get a small plate, you can get a beer, you can get a glass of wine, or they have a restaurant attached to the bar where you can certainly fine dine, and that's owned by D'Amico Restaurants, and they have several restaurants throughout the town, and they're all worth a stop, and D'Amico and Sons probably have 8 outlets of sort of quality, quick, fast, casual restaurants that are very affordable, and yet you're eating very good food. So keep your eye out for those if you need a bite to eat or a drink.
One of the theaters you had mentioned was the State Theater, and I see that another native son, or at least another act that's known for Minneapolis, the Prairie Home Companion, will be back at the State, and I can't recall if that's where it started out or not.
No, that actually started in St. Paul, so I've sort of saved that for the St. Paul part. But Garrison, also being into democracy, he will perform in Minneapolis periodically. I would guess once a year he will perform at the State or the Orpheum Theater, and also he performs at the State Fair about once a year, so he gets around, makes sure that he gets to both cities, but he actually is very much a St. Paul phenomenon.
Okay. The State Theater didn't strike me as the right theater name I had associated in my head with him, but I did notice that he was playing there, so that's where my confusion was coming from.
Right.
Excellent. And yes, you had mentioned earlier, with a name like Christensen, I am related to a great number of people, actually on both sides, both the German and the Scandinavian side of my family. And the other nickname that we have for the Twin Cities, or for that general area, is the Holy Lands, of course, but that's a whole other story.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Sometimes we call it God's country, but we feel a bit embarrassed when we say that, but we think we might be right anyway.
Although my recollection is Garrison Keillor, who we've mentioned, who has written a book about his fictitious town, Lake Wobegon, and Lake Wobegon days. His story about Minneapolis is that the Norwegian bachelor farmers come over from Norway and they settle in Minnesota because it reminds them so much of home, forgetting that the reason they left home was that the land wasn't any darn good. So.
Yes, and that the winters were brutal. And
the winters were brutal.
I have been to Denmark and Norway and Sweden, and in fact, I'm going back this summer, and it's just shocking, some of those areas, how much they look like South Dakota, Minnesota, North Dakota, whatever. And so Garrison is absolutely right about that, but at the end of the day, we'll stay here, and in fact, we have a growing metropolis area, so we're doing okay.
And the other reason I wanted to bring that up now is my recollection is that downtown Minneapolis in the wintertime, because the winters do get fairly cold, isn't there also an elevated walkway that you can get around downtown without actually even having to go outside?
Yes, we are famous for our skyway system, and that is true in both downtowns. And pretty much you can go anywhere in either downtown, especially, I guess I'd have to say, Minneapolis, but without going outside. And many people, for better or worse, leave their suburban garage and get in their warm car and go to a heated garage in Minneapolis and go to their office and do all their running around to the health club or lunch or errand running through the skyways. I don't like them myself. I like to get outside and see the buildings. But I know that skyways are what most people prefer in the winters, and probably on a hot day in the summer, too. They're very busy. They're very practical. I get lost in them. Maybe that's my biggest problem. I just kind of get confused. If you don't know your way around, that would probably happen to you, too. But it's a good place to get lost, and they're just dotted with little restaurants and food shops, and there's a whole level of living on those skyways, and well worth checking out.
Excellent. And where should we go next?
If we've spent enough time at the Walker Arts Center, where you might want to stop and eat at Gather, by the way, probably the four best tables in town are the outdoor tables at Gather, which is up in the Walker Arts Center and is a wonderful restaurant. They have four outdoor tables that overlook downtown Minneapolis, so that's worth a stop, too. But when it's time to leave this area, I would probably head to Uptown. You can walk up Hennepin Avenue or Lyndale, or you can catch a bus. The walk would be smart because there's so much to see along the way and places to stop. Both Lyndale and Hennepin are lined with bars and shops and restaurants and things. But the Uptown area, Lake and Hennepin, or Lake and Lyndale nearby, lots of bars and restaurants and shops and boutiques and galleries and all sorts of things. But to me, the Uptown area, which has become more commercial, there's a lot more of Gaps and national chains there now. But if you just go a little further over, you're going to see what probably most people would take you to just about first in the Twin Cities area, and that is the Minneapolis lakes. There's a whole bunch of them, but Lake of the Isles, Calhoun, and Harriet all connect with each other, basically. The lakes are just gorgeous to walk around. You can rent rollerblades and blade around them. You can, again, rent bikes, or what I would recommend is go to the Calhoun, I don't want to say kiosk, but there's a restaurant and there's a place to rent boats there, and you can rent a sailboat, you can rent a kayak, you can rent a canoe. I would recommend that you rent a canoe if you got two people, and go canoe around Lake of the Isles and into another lake called Cedar, which has pretty good swimming and some beaches. And there's even a hidden little tunnel that will take you to a hidden lake called Brownie, and you're practically downtown again, and you'll see the skyline dotting your view here and there. Brownie is very lovely and hardly any buildings on it, maybe a railroad track behind the trees, and you could swear that you're somewhere else. And you can stop for a swim at Cedar, and you can come back to Calhoun and watch the crazy windsurfers. Sometimes there are hundreds of them out there, and they will come within inches of your little slow kayak or canoe, so be careful. But sailboats and just beautiful, and you can check your boat back in and eat at a wonderful restaurant there called Tin Fish, and it has lots of outdoor tables and very good fish tacos and reasonable fare. And again, rollerblading around 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these lakes, depending on your strength, is just fascinating. You couldn't ask for better people watching, and it's just beautiful blue water all over the place.
Now, when you say people watching, the first time my wife was in Minneapolis, and I'd have to say, probably the only time, no, she's been there twice. She went once with me in the early 80s. She went there for a wedding of a roommate who was from there. And my wife grew up in Long Island, and she's about 5'2" with dark hair, and she noticed herself standing in crowds of tall blonde women.
Yes, they are everywhere. We have more blonde people per capita than I'm sure any city, and lots of beautiful blonde women. Now that you mention it, I guess it is worth pointing out. We become more ethnic as the years go by, as does every city, and that's a good thing. But yes, we still have a lot of Scandinavians and a lot of blonde people. Anybody who comes here for the first time are a little bit surprised. And when you are blading or boating around those lakes, you'll see lots of blonde people.
And lots of tall was actually probably the overall thing that she noticed. But of course, in the wintertime, you have to grow up tall to get to the sunlight. So,
Yeah, that's right. And I remember when I was in Stockholm, Sweden, I was blown away by all the tall blonde women. But I think when I pointed out to my wife, who is a tall blonde woman, she said, "Well, why is this so unusual? Why do your eyes keep popping out? It's just like being at home." I said, "Yes, but there are even more of them in Stockholm, and that's the first time I've seen that, I think."
Excellent. And where to next?
You can now take a little rail car that is historic that connects Lake Calhoun to Lake Harriet being the southernmost lake. And I would recommend going up to Lake Harriet. You can walk, you can rollerblade. You can't get there by boat. There is a stream that connects the two, but it goes through a gorgeous cemetery called Lakewood Cemetery, which is worth a stop in itself, and is where Hubert Humphrey and lots of famous people are born, and it's got gorgeous tombstones going back hundreds of years, and lots of the Minneapolis wealth are buried there. But that was a diversion, because I would for sure make sure that you go to Lake Harriet, and you can take that rail car. And when you get to Lake Harriet, there is a band shell you'll find pretty quickly, and this is a gorgeous piece of architecture put up, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years ago. And it actually has a glass back, so as you are looking at the band shell or watching a concert, you see the lake behind it through the glass, which is a pretty amazing thing. And they put on free concerts almost every night of the summer, probably 90 easily. And it's everything from local community bands to sometimes a radio station will bring in a major act and put it there for free. And thousands of people can sit there or spread out in the hill that surrounds it. And there is a wonderful little place to get food there called Bread and Pickle. And you can bring your picnic, or you can pick up a snack there. And once again, you can do some boating, or you can just walk and blade around. But it's a very beautiful lake. And in addition to those attractions, just off to the side is a gorgeous rose garden that's well worth walking through. And there is a neighborhood that you can walk to just a few blocks away called Linden Hills. Very beautiful, sweet little neighborhood. The neighbors have done a good job. If you're anti-progress, and I'm not sure I always am, but anytime anybody wants to put up condos there or a high-rise and increase the density, they manage to stop it. And as a consequence, it still is a quaint neighborhood that has wonderful things there. There is a meat market that is a good old-fashioned meat market, and there is a wonderful co-op that is very well known, and there's a wonderful bakery. And there's even a great kid store called Creative Kid Stuff. They've branched out and opened other places, but this is the original, and it's very creative, needless to say, and full of kind of old-fashioned things that you play with, not to be confused with video games or iPods. So people love that store and go out of their way to go there. And one of the hottest restaurants in town is called Tilia, and I'm not sure how he snuck getting open in there, probably because it's so small, and the neighbors all winked at each other and said, "Wouldn't we love a great restaurant here after all?" And Tilia has opened up with Stephen Brown as the owner and chef, and it is quite small, but he has 20-some beers on tap, and you watch them prepare the food for 6 chefs working their butts off. It's a tough table to get. You're only going to get a table at 5 or 5:30 or maybe 9:30. Otherwise, you're going to wait a while. But it's worth the wait, and the food is reasonable, and he's a very creative chef with wild hair and kind of a wild reputation and history in the town. I was just there last week, and it's well worth trying to sneak in if you possibly can. So that's Linden Hills. There's not much there. It's just a couple blocks long, and then you can walk back to Harriet's and look at the tall blonde women again if you want to.
Excellent. And it sounds like it's time that we do equal time here for St. Paul.
Well, actually, I was having you spend a second day in Minneapolis.
Oh, sorry, that was just my first day. Okay.
Yeah, there's too much to see. There's a whole other day. So one place that I think everybody should try to get to, and I'll just keep it brief because you could get lost there. You could live there, and frankly, hundreds of thousands of people probably do, but about a half hour, 45 minutes out of Minneapolis, and somewhere you could go for the back half of your day or for the evening. If it's summer, we've got long days. It doesn't get dark till 11 after all. We're so far north. One of the benefits being so far north. But so at some point, and I'll just put this on with day one and say you're going there in the evening in the summer, you should get to Lake Minnetonka. This is just an amazing lake. It just looks like dozens of lakes, but they all connect, and it all comprises one lake with various names and ways to get lost and confused, but we'll call it Lake Minnetonka. There's 125 miles of lakeshore around Lake Minnetonka alone, and it is a great place to rent a pontoon, which you can do pretty reasonably, and bring your food and bring your cooler and just get your map and go look at it. The mansions and the homes are just stunning. Everybody from the Pillsburys and Daytons and some of the bigger names, their old estates are there. Some of them have moved into other people now, and some of them have not. But there are mansions and beautiful homes all over the place. And it's great swimming. It's decent fishing if you want to do that. Or if you prefer, there are many lines that have cruise boats out there. And you can take a dinner cruise, you can take a happy hour cruise, a cocktail cruise, or just a touring cruise that tells you what you're seeing and shows you some of the highlights. If you're on Minnetonka and you have a boat, you probably don't want to drive here because it's really quite a drive, but you could. One of the places worth stopping is Lord Fletcher's. Again, great people watching. This is one of those bars and restaurants that goes on and on and on and on and has hundreds of parking spaces by boat alone and has great people watching, and there's simple sort of Irish-style pubs. There's outdoor patios. There's a fancy restaurant. There's restaurants with view of the lake. Well worth a stop. And I would also say if you're on a boat in Lake Minnetonka, you must stop at Big Island, which literally is an island. And in winter, people can drive onto the island to get to their homes there or their second homes or summer homes. There's not many homes on it. Most of it is wild. And there's very nice beaches there that you can swim on. But tying up at Big Island is phenomenal people watching. There was one day, I think, that I counted 55 boats tied together, mostly with youth that should be working, I suppose, but it is summer. They're home from college or they're in high school or whatever, tied up at this island just partying and blasting music. And because they're tied up, you can go from one boat to the next. And they do, and they swim, and they go crazy, and it's great people watching, but you can also take a nice little swim there, and you can go on the beach. And in the summertime, they even one night a week trying to make this island a little more family-friendly, because sometimes, of course, it gets a little party crazy, and some of the locals don't do that, and occasionally there's the accident or tragedy, I suppose, and then they clamp down on it again. But one night a week in the summers, they set up an enormous screen on the beach on Big Island, and hundreds of boats come and circle around it and watch a full-length movie. And needless to say, you can bring your food and bring your drink. It's just an amazing sight. I don't think you see this in too many places in America, and if you're out in the evening, well worth stopping to see that. There's also a few very nice towns on Lake Minnetonka. Excelsior is just cute as a bug in a rug, and very old-fashioned, kind of lost in time. It still has a very famous ice cream stand where, in fact, Mick Jagger, the line Jimmy, comes from there. I'm blanking on the song, but that's one of the legends there. And there is good restaurants and good old shops and boutiques and galleries, and yet it's really tiny. You can even stop and get a haircut in a barbershop that looks like it's been there for 80 years, and maybe it has. And downtown Wayzata is the closest to the Twin Cities, and again, pretty much of just a small town, very upscale, but very nice. And you can eat at some very good restaurants. You can just walk the streets. You can sit on one of the docks and just watch the sun go down. Highly recommend some time at Lake Minnetonka. If you can squeeze it into your schedule, you could do it.
And just before we get away from Lake Minnetonka,
Sure.
just a clarification there, because I'm not sure that everyone caught it. When you say that you can drive to Big Island in the winter but not the summer, it's not because there's a road that exists in the winter but not the summer. The lake has frozen over.
The lake has frozen over, which is something we do that people find shocking, but...
Well, especially when you talked about the scale of the lake, yeah.
We drive on the lakes a lot, and in Minnetonka the people do just go right over the ice, and I think that one of the cities even keeps a nice roadway so that you can get out there. In the summer, there is no bridge, but that's the way you would do it. And it's worth mentioning, as a little side note, if you are here in the winter, why not go ice fishing somewhere? We just pack up our cars and trucks and go out on the lakes and dig a hole or bore a hole and go ice fishing, or go skating, or there's those ice sailboats that are crazy and go so fast. All kinds of recreation on the ice in the winter.
Excellent. Okay.
that probably fills day one. If we are ready, we can talk about some things to do in Minneapolis on the second day.
Absolutely.
Well, if you have another day in Minneapolis, I would focus, for starters, on the river. And the river goes right through both downtowns, so it's easy to find. And both towns are doing a good job of sort of restoring the river and building parks and concert venues and more free space and boutiques and neighborhoods. In a way, I think they kind of forgot that for a while, so it's good to see that we're
And I'm not going to assume that everybody knows what river we're talking about.
This is the Mississippi, Mississippi, and it goes all the way from Itasca, Minnesota, where it starts as a little stream, all the way to New Orleans, where it begins to go into the Gulf of Mexico. But it goes through both cities and winds its way. And on the second day, I would spend some time looking at that river and thinking about it. A good place to start is just to cross. I've talked about Hennepin Avenue. You can cross the Hennepin Avenue Bridge and suddenly find yourself going to the right and a little bit to the left. There's lots of bars and restaurants. St. Anthony, Maine is the name of the building, and a couple of the oldest establishments in town. One of them is called Procna on Main, and it is Main Street that goes right on the river, and it is a cobblestone street, a very tiny little street, and there's lots of things to do there. A stone arch bridge is just down from the Hennepin Avenue Bridge, and this has become strictly pedestrian and bikes, so it's a wonderful place to go out and take your pictures and look at the Minneapolis skyline and just hang out if you'd like. Another thing you can do on the river is rent a Segway. There is a business there that takes you on Segway tours along the river and into a few of the neighborhoods. I have yet to do that, but every time I see people on it, I say, this is something I need to do, gosh darn it. So that's a great way to get around and see the area. And when you're at the river, there is a little island there that's also worth a stop, and it's called Nicollet Island, and there is an inn there called, of course, the Nicollet Island Inn, with probably, 40 to 60 rooms, a nice place to stay because you're looking out and seeing the skyline or the river. And there's a wonderful little bar and restaurant there as well with very good breakfasts. So make sure that you check out the river, and you can continue just a few blocks and go into a neighborhood that we call Northeast. Yes, and or R-D-E-A-S-T, left over from the ethnic people that I'm sure called it that, and we still just call it that. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say Northeast. And there is a very booming neighborhood there called Northeast, but this is still on the river pretty much, and there are more shops and restaurants and bars every day, including one of our excellent grocery store chains here called Lund's, which is worth popping in because it has amazing seafood and bakery and flowers and organic section and everything. There's a very old bar and restaurant called Nye's, N-Y-E', that has the world's most dangerous polka band that plays there on the weekends on one side in a very old-school bar, and then on the other side, which is a completely different vibe, there is a piano bar where people sit up and you pay a few bucks and he plays the piano and gives you the microphone, and excellent singers there. If you think you want to do this just because you're drunk and it'll be fun, that's fine, you'll be accepted. But let me warn you, there are some excellent singers hanging out there, and it's a wild scene, and huge Naga booths in yellow and red, sparkly. And I like to see that because my people were farmers, and my grandpa did raise Nagas, so we like to see the Naga hides being used all over the place. So Nye's is a great place to go, and you can go from room to room there and feel like you're in one place to another, not really knowing what city or country you're in. There's a famous old tiny church there that's probably the oldest in the Twin Cities called Lady of Lourdes that's worth popping in. And if you want to go further into Northeast, whether you're on a bike or car or busing or however, you'll notice that it's very ethnic, very old school, big old houses, blue collar. This neighborhood popped up with Minneapolis to provide the labor, and lots of Polish people, German people, Irish people, in addition to the Scandinavians. And you'll notice that there's a bar on almost every corner. And that is not true throughout most of the Twin Cities, which have been pretty controlled and conservative to some extent. But Northeast had its own zoning, and so there is a wonderful old bar on every corner. Some of them get turned into swanky, fun restaurants from time to time, or someone new and young buys it and makes it more hip. But usually you'll find old-timers hanging out there in the afternoon, morning, as the case may be, having lunch, whatever, and then they might become more hip in the evening. Not all of them, but some of them as young people begin to move into this neighborhood, both because it's convenient and affordable and has good housing stock. Probably one restaurant bar worth mentioning that recently turned over again is now called Psycho Susie's, and it is huge, several stories, and she has the world's largest tiki bar, I think, is one of the stories, and that bleeds out to an enormous patio that overlooks the river. You're up the river a ways. Very popular hangout, and that's the kind of place where on Valentine's night she ran a special. I believe it was a couple could eat a large pizza, a six-pack of beer that would be brought in a bucket full of ice for $50, or you could choose a wine, and I think there was dessert or salad thrown in. But the entertainment was a live ukulele player. How often do you see that?
Well, it depends where we are.
That's true. If you're in Hawaii, you might see him every day.
Exactly. A few episodes ago was Lanai, so I was getting ukulele lessons. So, yeah, it really does depend on where you are.
Glad to hear it. We have ukuleles in my house. So it's kind of making a comeback, I think.
Indeed.
Yes. If you wanted another destination on your second day that's pretty easy to navigate, you can take the light rail from downtown. We don't have light rail all over the place, but we're working on it. It's a wonderful line that takes you to the Mall of America, which is somewhere I promised I wouldn't mention. So now that I've mentioned it, I don't have to not mention it again. But it goes all the way from downtown to the Mall of America to the airport, so it's a practical thing to use. And you can also take the light rail to Minnehaha Park, which lots of people are fond of, and is the site of Scandinavian festivals in the summer that bring out thousands of people for the different ethnicities. And Minnehaha Park has the Minnehaha Falls, which are quite lovely and interesting to look at. Of course, it depends on how hard they're running, because in the spring they gush, and then by the dry time of summer they might not be gushing so much. And in fact, we're having a drought right now, so it might not be as fascinating. But there's always some water flowing, and there's a wonderful park there, as I mentioned, and there is a fairly new restaurant that is quite affordable, and you put your order in and they bring it to you, called Sea Salt. And this is one of the best seafood restaurants in town, ironically. It's run by people that are extremely passionate about seafood and get to go pick the best stuff every day, have great connections. So that's a fun place, and you can eat outside and hang out, and they have good beers and wines. And if you're in that area, you might want to go down Lake Street and take a look. There's kind of a revival going on, this Lake Street that runs east and west from Minneapolis to St. Paul and beyond. And there's a wonderful old shop that's going on its 125th anniversary, I believe, called Ingebrigtsen's, which originally was a meat market and still is a huge meat market. And lines go around the block in the wintertime at Christmas when people are getting their traditional Scandinavian items at Ingebrigtsen's.
And when you say they're traditional Scandinavian items, are we talking about our lutefisk and our lefse, or what are we talking about?
You are talking about lutefisk and lefse and rullepulse and lingonberries and Danish sausage, Swedish sausage, potato sausage, blood sausage.
Got it.
Sweet sausage, rummegrøt, all kinds of wonderful things that you can't find everywhere, though you can find them. But people like the old recipes. They have a tradition of going there. And Ingebrigtsen's has also built a wonderful gift store attached to it, and a sort of sewing and crafts store for the Scandinavian crafts. And you can go in there and buy a $3 ornament that came from Scandinavia, or you can go in there and buy a piece of jewelry for several $100s. So that's a good place to stop. And very near there, to make sure that we show off our ethnicities a little bit, is a place that popped up not too long ago in a huge old Sears and Roebuck, a beautiful building, and it's now called Midtown Global Market. And that has a dizzying array of restaurants and food stands in there, and you just kind of walk around in circles and get a taste here, get a taste there. Do your research so you can decide what you want to eat, but it's a wonderful place for taking a few pictures and looking at the foods and the people.
Well, and I would say to those people who are coming and trying some of the ethnic foods, if you don't happen to be Norwegian, I would recommend maybe the lingonberries or something over the lutefisk. For those who are not familiar with it, lutefisk is a gelatinous white fish cured in lye. So if you're not Norwegian and didn't grow up with it, it isn't a popular dish, let's just say.
No, it's not. It's only popular in the holiday season. I have one bite a year, and I put a lot of butter on it, and I actually kind of like it. It has the taste of lobster, but it has a texture that you really can't describe and don't want to. So lingonberries, however, are delicious, and lots of the Scandinavian food is. And I'll just mention as a side note, there is a restaurant that's probably the hottest one in town right now called The Bachelor Farmer, and that is downtown Minneapolis, and it's owned by Dayton brothers, who come from the Dayton lineage of our Dayton department stores and now better known for creating Target stores, of course. But our governor is Mark Dayton, and he is from the family, and his two sons opened The Bachelor Farmer, and they really do a wonderful job of sort of serving some of the old traditional foods and styles on their menu. I wouldn't exactly call it Scandinavian, but it's a good place to go get a taste of those kinds of farm and Scandinavian flavored dishes.
Now, you say traditional foods, and I'm going to Jell-O salads and hot dish, so I'm not sure that I'm in the right ballpark here.
Yes, we take a lot of grief for our Jell-O salads and hot dish. Best eaten in a church basement, by the way. But no, they might do Arctic char, they might do torsk, they might do monkfish, they will do a pickled beets, they will do the things your grandma did that she learned to do from her grandma who came over from Sweden or Norway.
Okay.
With a modern twist.
Excellent. Any place else? Or are we wrapping up Minneapolis here?
We are probably wrapping up Minneapolis. I would mention that in the evening you might want to go to Eat Street because it is, again, a very ethnic range. This is Nicollet starting at about 24th or 26th. You could practically walk there from downtown or take a bus. But it's a neighborhood worth mentioning because if you like to eat and there's a street called Eat Street, you probably want to at least wander through it. And that has everything from a restaurant that's been there for decades called the Black Forest, which is German, to lots of Asian restaurants that have popped up in recent years. And then the trendy new place that's opened up there called Eat Street Social, which is probably where the young and hip people are going. And since you're near there, I must put in a plug for the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. We do have another enormous arts institute that goes on and on and on, stories and stories and wings and wings. You can find something in there no matter how much you don't like art. And that's very near Eat Street and also has a children's theater attached to it that has shows probably 6 nights a week if you're traveling with family. It's one of the best children's theaters in town, and lots of the people on the stage are children, and yet it's very professional. So those are near Eat Street if you want one more outing in Minneapolis. But we should move on from Minneapolis one of these hours.
And if it sounds like the interview cut off there in the middle, it did. We'll be doing the second half of this interview on next week's show as we deal with St. Paul and then also with some other day trips outside of the Twin Cities. I had a question posted by Miranda up on the Amateur Traveler podcast wall on Facebook at facebook.com/amateurtraveler. Just listening to your Lanai podcast today and thought, have you considered putting your photos on Instagram? Sometimes I don't get to watch your slideshows during the podcasts because I'm usually driving, and I think more people might be able to see yours and other travel photos. Just a thought. Thanks for all you do. And I did respond to Miranda, but I thought I'd share with the rest of you. I have had the request of could I do a separate slideshow. The two big problems are, one is I don't always have the rights to use the photos in that way. We're sometimes using Creative Commons photos from Flickr. You'll notice that the enhanced version links to the original photograph so that you can get a chance to see the whole photograph, and also so that I comply with the Creative Commons license of that photograph. And then two, we just don't have the time, I'm afraid. Right now, the Amateur Traveler takes, I would guess, around 8 hours at least least to prepare every episode, and that is between my time and my son Mike's time, who is doing the editing. And right now, you may have noticed that we don't have a sponsor for the podcast. I don't actually even have time to look for sponsors because I'm working on the podcast. So to Miranda and those who've asked that question, probably not. Chris sent me an email and said, "What an awesome show on Lanai. It brought back memories of a great trip that my wife and I got to go on a few years back. We went with Cisco, and the following news stories happened." And Chris linked to a story about a menacing fire that threatened the Four Seasons at Manele Bay where they were staying. I have to second your thoughts on the Four Seasons. Although I normally don't stay at Four Seasons, the experience that they provided during this fiasco was amazing. When we evacuated the hotel, we were staying on the beach. The hotel employees were actually walking by and handing us water bottles and apologizing for the inconvenience. Amazing service, and although one day was ruined, the Four Seasons really made our trip memorable. After we left Lanai for the 5-day trip, we wanted to stay on the outskirts of Honolulu for a few days to see all the sights. Flying from Lanai to Honolulu and jumping into a car and immediately experiencing the hustle and bustle of the highways made us both say, "Wow, we wish we were back in Lanai." It actually felt like a time warp or a cartoon episode where a guy is transported to the middle of traffic. That really made us appreciate what Lanai has to offer. Again, thanks again. Keep up the good work, and congrats on the new job. And that was Chris, who was our guest on an episode on Pittsburgh a year ago or so. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email as Chris did, comment on the Facebook community as Miranda did, or leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. Again, if you happen to be in iTunes, we love 5-star reviews.
Got to see one more cathedral.